when I was beginning and I was day counting, I was very close-minded to a lot of the first few meetings because I was at a point where I was looking for a reason not to stay in the rooms or like
Yes.
to not keep coming back. And so I'm glad that I found within like my fifth or sixth day of trying to basically be a dry drunk, like showing up to meetings that I wasn't clicking with, found like the queerest rainbow, inclusive, progressive Zoom room that meets like every night at 9 p.m. Eastern
Yeah.
time.
Welcome back to the Sobriety Diaries, friends. I'm your host, Nate Kelly, best-selling author and podcast producer, but most importantly, a recovering alcoholic 8 years from my last drink. I am so grateful to be bringing you these powerful stories of recovery told by you, those who live them. If you're joining us for the first time, check out more information at thesobrietydiaries.com and make sure to share the podcast with one person in your life who may need it today. You never know what they may need to hear. And with that, let's open the diary on episode 111 of the Sobriety Diaries. Welcome back to the Sobriety Diaries, friends. Today's an exciting conversation. A peer of mine in the queer recovery space, Steve Bennet-Martin, the host of the gAy podcast, So Clever. Steve, welcome. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. I am honored. And I'm glad that you found it clever. People either get the reference right away with gAy or it doesn't
Yeah.
land at all. And it kind of tells you where you are in your recovery journey.
Exactly right. Well, we've been trying to make this work now for a couple weeks. I've admired your podcast since I saw it sort of come on the scene. And, we definitely have similar audiences. So I was
Mhm.
excited when you agreed to come on the show. I always like to start with trying to get an understanding of, how we got to this space where perhaps you sought a path to recovery and the great things that you're doing today. But take us back to Steve, maybe in the throes of addiction, or what prompted you to seek a path to recovery.
I definitely realized how it was progressing to the point where it wasn't getting any better. It was a roller coaster for a long time where I tried to manage what was clearly unmanageable and doing my best to try and justify my drinking and my behaviors. I was very much one of those. Well, my perception of an alcoholic or an addict was, a hobo on the underpass
Right.
living out of a bag. And I was like, well, I still have my husband, I still have my job, I still have, my friends, I still have this life that on the outside appears like I've got my stuff together. And it didn't matter that I was like waking up every single morning near the end there, like wishing that I had died in my sleep from a brain aneurysm or something, and like being upset that I woke up again, and then having to spend like an hour doom scrolling on my phone of like, what did I do? Or who did I say what to? Or, getting sick on the way to work and trying to pretend it was like stomach issues when it was the fact that I was like
Yeah.
drinking an obscene amount of liquor, and trying to like be miserable and then like say I'll never do it again. And of course, by the time it was 10, 11, or 12, like noon, it was happening again. And it
Ready
was
to
just,
roll again, right? Give me an hour or
yes.
two, I'll be good.
Hmm. And it finally got to the point where when for the longest time, my husband kind of like looked the other way, or like he would find my closet filled with like liquor bottles, like almost as tall as I was at 6'3". And like, I'd be like, oh, and I like talk my way out of it somehow. But it finally got to the point where he's like, this is getting out of control, like for him. And I was like having to face consequences possibly for my marriage. And that was when I was okay. Like I thought he was the first person I was like, okay, it is out of control. Like I can't handle it anymore. And he suggested I try some meetings, and I tried like a handful of different ones where like I didn't really remember what they said necessarily or like what was happening around me, because I also wasn't expecting for me to go through detox because I didn't realize that I was like drinking that much, but that I would have the physical withdrawal symptoms. But I know like it was days before I could focus. But what I do remember and feeling from the first meeting or two, or like, was the sense of that even if that specific group wasn't for me, just to keep going to different groups until I found one that was. And that's what I did. And I found a group within like my first week that kind of got me through my first couple of years. And from there, it's just more groups and more places.
Yeah. It's funny you say you don't necessarily remember maybe your first few meetings. Personally, I don't either. I did unfortunately go to a few intoxicated the first time around.
Mhm.
Did you ever find yourself in the rooms under the influence?
I did not. I remember about a decade before I actually got sober, when I was in my early 20s, I had to go because I had a DUI. I had to go to a handful of meetings to get the
Mm.
signatures, but my brain was so closed off at that point. Like the moment that I realized that they weren't going to be teaching me how to get away with it better next time, I just tuned it out.
Yeah.
In one ear, out the other, like judging everyone, comparing rather than trying to identify. And like I got the number of signatures I needed, and then I never looked back. And this time around, like I listened, but yeah, it was definitely because I was at a much different place. I had gone a lot like darker internally, where even though I hadn't lost everything, I hadn't lost everything yet, and I was realizing that I was reaching the end for a lot of those yets.
Yes, the yets. It is
Mm-hmm.
interesting, once we start realizing these consequences to our drinking or to our behavior, or people from the outside perhaps start recognizing these things about how we're conducting ourselves, really, is what it comes down to. Um, I found myself really just trying to protect my drinking at all costs and blaming
Mm-hmm.
other things. Like you mentioned, the illnesses, I must have come down with something, or, the DUI, the cop was out to get me, or it was a trap, whatever it may be, which for me is where a lot of the dishonesty came from. And dishonesty is one of my character defects that I have to really still keep kind of my finger on the pulse of. Um, did you find yourself sort of creating these other scenarios or being dishonest in your behaviors?
I definitely was dishonest about drinking, but one thing I've learned even in sobriety is that like dishonesty is definitely one of my character defects, where I'll find myself being dishonest about things that I don't even need to be
Doesn't
dishonest
matter,
about.
right? It's
Yeah,
silly.
yeah, I was gonna say like once I started recently like going to the gym in like November, December, I joined like this local infrared sauna thing where I can get like afterwards to rest and recover. And it's been cool to kind of meditate and almost pray in there. And like I have a spiritual experience, but because it was so like over the top, like bougie, I felt, or I was like insecure about it. Like I hid it from my husband for like a month and a half that I was going to this place like 3 times a week for 40 minutes. And like I was like, why? And then when I finally told him, he's like, I don't care. Like, do your thing. But it was because like just my gut instinct sometimes, if I'm insecure about some of the actions that I'm doing, whether they're actually bad for me or not, like if I'm just insecure about them, I'll try and hide them because I don't want people to see my insecurities.
Yes. I think, and if we dig deep and really look at it, it probably stems from, as gay men, really creating different scenarios or creating different reasons. And, at least for me, it goes back to, you know, before I came out and being dishonest or not being a true version of myself, presenting myself to people as not, my true self, because there was shame attached to it. And that's when I still can find the dishonesty creeping up, is where it's attached to something that perhaps I feel shameful about. And I think, our queer brothers and sisters still suffer from that. And I think, with the the addiction statistics within the queer community, and God forbid, the suicide rates are just astronomical. How were you, or sort of when you were into your recovery enough to realize that perhaps you could start helping other people? Was the first thought straight to, social media and a podcast, or did you sponsor anyone before that? What did your sort of journey into helping others look like?
I jumped right into podcasting because I've always loved the art of podcasting. And I had one podcast that I just couldn't make work, no matter how hard my husband and I tried to pivot and not pod fade away into existence, but like it wasn't great either. And but I had all this experience of like how to do the podcasting stuff. So when I got sober, And right away, I was like, looking as someone who also loves listening to podcasts, I was looking for sober gay podcasts. And, there was one at the time. Now there's a lot more, but like at the time, there was just the one that I found, and it wasn't what I was looking for in terms of having it be, a wide variety of different queer voices, all sharing different stories
Yeah.
from different routes of recovery. And I'm so glad that there's multiple podcasts like there today. But at the time, I was like, well, I can make one of them because I already know how to do it. And it really was a blessing because, my 12-step program saved my life and worked for me, just, going through the steps and everything my first, year of recovery. And I'm still a 5 meeting a week kind of guy, but it's also exposed me to people that don't work those types of programs, but have gotten sober in other different ways, that if all I did was go to meetings, I never get to meet a lot of these people or be open to these other ideas of what sobriety can look like. And so it's been really great in it, pushing me out of my comfort zone in another way.
If you're looking for a new recovery resource and a community of peers with lived experience, you have to check out my friends, Dave and Susan Kenny at Emergo Academy. Dave and Susan bring over 15 years of experience in residential treatment, recovery coaching, speaking and mentorship, and now as best-selling authors and hosts of Emergo TV. Emergo TV is a live call-in style show where they answer all of your questions about sobriety, mental health, family and life challenges, and anything else you may need guidance on. Let's face it, life can be hard and we shouldn't do it alone. Head over to emergoacademy.com for more information on their brain-first approach to recovery, their best-selling book, Actualized Recovery, and where to find Emergo TV live every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's Emergo Academy, EMERGO Academy.com, and we'll see you this Thursday. Hey there, future podcaster. I'm Nate Kelly, and today I'm thrilled to introduce you to something that is going to transform your podcasting journey. Are you ready to turn your passion for podcasting into a thriving reality? Let me introduce you to the Podcast Launch Accelerator. Imagine a 6-month mentorship program where you get personalized one-on-one coaching, an action plan tailored to your goals, and a comprehensive podcast growth blueprint. But wait, there's more. We're throwing in exclusive interviews with industry experts, a professional podcast success toolkit, and access to our monetization masterclass. At the end of 6 months, we guarantee you a spot in the top 10%, appearance on top iTunes or Spotify charts, and a monetized podcast with host-read ads. Ready to launch your podcast? Click the link in today's show notes to secure your spot in the Podcast Launch Accelerator. The rooms saved my life 100%, and so much respect for the program and the literature and the resources that come along with it, and the sense of community and finding people like you. The hugs. I'm a big hugger and like handshaker, and there's something about sharing that with another person that I missed during the pandemic, and is what prompted my whole podcasting journey as well. I'm curious, since we sort of are on the same plane here, how do you reconcile maybe the traditions of AA and bringing that to sort of a media platform where perhaps the old timers may look at what we're doing as going against the traditions? I don't believe that. Obviously, we're here talking about it, but if someone asks you that question, or, reconciling it with your own program, what are your thoughts on that?
I tell them not to listen to my first dozen or so episodes where I had no idea what the fuck I was doing and what
Yes.
traditions were, because I leave them up because it kind of shows, like, as a beginner, you don't really know a lot of that. So like as a beginner with a beginner's mindset, I was doing my best however I could. And as I learn more about traditions, I've learned to say things more like referring it to my program rather than naming the specific program.
Right.
And, I keep things vaguer. And, whenever I tell stories, I don't tell other people's stories or shares or anything about what happens in the meetings. I keep it very, anonymous, because that's kind of the intention behind it all. So it's at the same time, though, to try and do a sober related podcast and not have people be able to mention the program when that's such a popular way of doing it. I'm not going to want to monitor someone else's share if they come in and treat it like a share in the meeting. In my podcast, a lot of times I don't even get the chance to ask questions because they're so used to talking for 20 minutes
Right.
straight
Yeah.
that I'm not going to change the way that they share because I don't want to change the way that they're telling their story because it's their story. So if they come at it from a 12-step angle, I always make it very clear. And I don't think anyone ever once has thought that gay A was affiliated with AA or like any of the other
Right.
A's. Everyone's like very clear, like this kid is not above like board. He's not associated with the grapevine or any of that. Like, and nor like have I tried to present myself to be like it's very clear that like what I try and make it on my podcast that it is about like any type of sobriety is valid. I'm just here to help kind of share other people's stories while sharing mine as well.
Beautiful. So, one thing that I look at, sort of one of the pillars of the program, of course, is the literature. And most of what we use in the program is original from, the 1930s and 40s. And, as gay men or as queer people that utilize a 12-step program, for me personally, and if I look at things too in depth or try to analyze some of the literature or resources, I can look at things and see this sort of exclusivity of it, as opposed to it being inclusive and evolving with our culture these days. What are your thoughts on perhaps updating the literature? Do we think that goes against sort of the foundation of the program, and moving toward a more inclusive version of the program?
I definitely feel like there's merit to it because I'm very glad that when I was beginning and I was day counting, I was very close minded to a lot of the first few meetings because I was at a point where I was looking for a reason not to stay in the rooms or like
Yes.
to not keep coming back. And so I'm glad that I found within like my fifth or sixth day of trying to basically be a dry drunk, like showing up to meetings that I wasn't clicking with, found like the queerest rainbow inclusive progressive Zoom room that meets like every night at 9 p.m. Eastern
Yeah.
time. And but at the type point where like everything is gender neutral whenever you do readings, like we revise it and put in, we put in the parentheses so that they know that what's happening, it's not like the original text, so we'll make the little note, but that like we revised to make gender neutral stuff. But like we would do things to make it more approachable and inclusive to people, and it worked for me because there were like other times where I would go to other meetings and it wasn't like that and it didn't feel inclusive and I was ready to like run away. And as I was in that one room that was safe and warm and inclusive and used gender neutral terms and said people instead of men and women and did everything to try and make sure that everyone felt included, as I feel like we all should be, it helped me open my mind to other meetings as I went on. We're to the point now where like I'll go to any meeting because I understand that like I'm there to get the message, not like necessarily how it's delivered, but the feelings of identifying with these people rather than comparing about how they lead their meetings or how they say their words.
Yeah.
And just try and get the feeling out of it. But I wouldn't have been able to do that, I think, in my first 6 to 8 months if it wasn't for those meetings that were inclusive and did update verbiage and
Yeah.
had strict bomber policies and all that.
So important. Yes. Utilize the virtual space for meetings. Find your people, I think, is important, to be in a safe space where you are willing to be vulnerable and rigorously honest, as they say. So I think putting yourself in a space where you can do so is so important,
Yeah.
necessary. Yeah. So, Steve, what are a few resources we can offer the listeners, um, perhaps in early recovery? A lot of my audience is in the first 90 days or perhaps still struggling with addiction. Um, Aside from the rooms or maybe a podcast, are there favorite books you have or additional resources that helped you in early recovery?
I would say, if possible, try and see what kind of sober community there is outside of 12-step meetings as well. Not every community is large enough to have sober spaces, but I found that even in my small town of Sarasota, I connected with Project Pride, a local organization early in my recovery, about my sobriety and said, "Is there anything like a sober social going on?" They're like, "No, let's start it." And next thing I knew, I was helping start this local thing where like we do it every couple months somewhere in town doing something where it's, there's no alcohol around and it's a sober safe space to have fun. And you never know like what could happen if you don't start asking like around kind of what is out there, because if it's not out there you can maybe create it. But I would say, finding a local community is really important, as well as just a virtual, and like social media was great as well, like sober Instagram. And just that's the Instagram that I know. I have friends that complain about going on social
Yes,
media for work because they're like, oh, it's so annoying going on social media because
same.
it's all work. And I'm like, but I guess it's like when you love what you work and like when you love
Yeah.
like what you're doing, it's like I log on and it's all about podcasting stuff or it's about sober stuff. And I'm like, this is my stuff. I love it. I could scroll all day about those two things. And so being able to have social media be a safe space in a world where I know not everyone considers it a safe space has also been really cool in recovery.
I love that. Yeah, there does seem to be this evolution, and even the younger generation seems to value more, self-care and mental health and, not standing for um, bullying, whether it's online or in person. It's promising, this younger generation. I have high hopes for those coming up behind us.
Oh, for sure. It's been really healing the past 5 months or 6 months now almost. I've been volunteering with a local youth organization called Also Youth. So I'll help with their after school program, and it's for queer kids in middle school through high school and early college that they can go after school to have a safe place to study if their home isn't safe, where they'll have social programs and peer support groups and counseling and things like that. And so that's been really rewarding being able to see them, because yeah, a lot of them like have it figured out. Like they hear that I'm sober and they're like, I don't plan on drinking because why would I do that? And I was like, good attitude. I hope you stick
Yes.
to it, because I didn't. But you know, it's awesome that so many of them just kind of like seem to get it quicker than I did, at least when I was their age.
Yeah, and the education piece and being proactive, rather than reactive once we're, in the depths of it, um, I think is huge, and something that we didn't have was that proactive approach and the education prior to being in a position where you're offered something, or, that it gets to the point of an addiction.
Yeah, I agree. I like that I was able to kind of test the waters with listening to meetings and sober podcasts and sober things before having to step foot into like an actual physical meeting, because that just felt a lot scarier than logging
Yeah.
into a Zoom room.
Yes, I love that. There's also this evolution kind of our culture as far as mocktails and alcohol-free events and, alcohol substitutions. Thoughts on maybe non-alcoholic beer or having a mocktail at a bar for you personally? Is that something that you're okay with? And um, your experience as far as that goes in early recovery.
My experience in early recovery was to stay away from all of it. I was at the time still working in sales and marketing, so I was out at marketing events, and like very early on, I remember trying a not like a non-alcoholic beer, and it was I didn't like the taste because I was never a beer drinker, so I was like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
But and I knew that I couldn't do like the mocktails. Like I would do like people would like, mix something like, cranberry juice with seltzer, and that's different than like I know like the mocktails that are like intentionally like I like botanicals or things that are supposed to have a zing to it. Like that sounded scary to me. Like I didn't want to feel
Yes.
anything that had the burn, because the burn is what I loved
Yeah.
about the drinking. So like give me like a fruity juice that's like high in sugar and calories, and like that I would be fine with if that's your mocktail. But if it actually is supposed to like burn or taste like there's alcohol in it, I knew that and it's still to this day, because I was a liquor kind of gal, like that would not be for me. I've actually since then like developed a taste for non-alcoholic beers. If I'm out at a social event, I'll have one in my hand, and it does kind of break the ice, make me feel comfortable. But I also don't drink it alcoholically. Like I have
Right.
the one, and it's in my hand for the 3 hours that I'm at the kickball after party. But at least that way, I it fit in like more. I don't have to have that conversation with every single person about my sobriety if I don't want to. Like, and I don't, like I said, I don't think about it afterwards. I'll finish, like I'll put it down if I'm halfway done and like not think about it. If that was alcohol in there, I would have had all of the beers and like
All of
moved
the
on then
beers.
to the bar. And then after the bar, I would have been like, all right, where are we getting like hot or Coke? Like, and where are we
Yeah.
going next? And
Same.
so I don't have that progression with non-alcoholic beer, so that's safe for me. But I don't, still the idea of having like a botanical thing that would burn on the way down is just scary for me
Yeah,
personally.
it seems a bit too close, like poking the bear unnecessarily.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Hmm.
I'm kind of right on the same page with you as far as the sort of event about it. You know, if
Hmm.
there's like a cool glass with like seltzer water and some flavoring, I'm down for that. That sounds fun. Um, I've tried Heineken Zero, which
Hmm.
is enjoyable. The newest one is hop water. Have you tried hop water?
I have not. There's one down here. I think it's called Orange Cart or Mango Cart. That seems to be everywhere. That
Interesting.
it's like, well, it's mango or orange. I forget which
Yeah.
fruit. They kind of taste the same when it's mixed with beer. But yeah, the Heineken Zero is probably like the one that I see most though, and that's always a good. Like I said, I was never a Heineken person to begin with, so
Yeah, me
I feel like
neither.
being able to have a Heineken Zero, it's not triggering or pushing any of my personal buttons, so it's fine.
Same, same. I love it.
Mhm.
Options, right?
Yeah.
So we get into launching the podcast. You know, it's in the title that we're representing the queer community within sobriety. What was the launch like for you and the feedback? Because I get feedback, I'm sure you do as well, about helping people in their journeys and, the way that we are helping others to share their message or their story. That that shit really hits deep for me, and that's the reason that I continue, to do the show. Were you surprised at feedback, positive or negative? And what was that experience like launching the show?
Launching the show, I mean, it's been interesting, especially with the positive feedback. It always comes on the days that I need it the
Yeah.
most. I always tell like a story of one of my listeners who still is like a listener to this day. When the trailer was live, before even the podcast came out, I was having like one of like a rough day at work, and I was like, why am I even doing this sober thing? I was somewhere between 45 and 60 days sober, and I get this message about like, hey, I just heard your trailer and I can't wait for your podcast. And I was like, well, I can't go out and drink now. This guy is waiting for my podcast next month,
Shit.
and like
Yeah.
I can't launch the podcast if I'm. So I didn't drink that day, like because of the podcast, and that's not the
Wow.
first time that necessarily like I don't remember getting as close as that like longer into sobriety, but it definitely has been days where I'm feeling miserable and I get the messages that it's great. And luckily, it's like the days that I get the constructive feedback of like how it could be better. Like at first, it was very much like me telling my story as I was counting days, which was kind of cool, but also I had no idea what I was doing. So they're
Yeah,
like,
I
have more
remember. I
guests on.
remember. Yes,
Yeah.
I was right
They're,
there with the entire launch of the show. I remember the trailer coming out.
yeah.
I remember you expressing that you were early in recovery and this was sort of
Hmm.
your journey. And then the show has evolved into welcoming guests and others sharing their story. And I think it's just beautiful how it all played out.
Yeah, that definitely. And it was interesting because then, within my first 3 to 6 months, like, because it launched on my 90 days sober. And then by the time I was 6 months to 9 months sober, I got the feedback of have more guests on. Like, you're really good at that. You're
Shut
really,
up,
really good
Steve.
at that. Yeah, I was like, cool. But then in the past year, it's kind of flipped where people are like, well, you don't really talk or share. You just have guests on and they tell their stories. So maybe you should also have your own opinion too. So it's almost, and I feel, I guess, more comfortable with that now that I'm trying to also have my own opinion in the show as well as not just go on and be like the blank slate that just whatever goes,
Yeah.
like, whenever guest comes on, shares their story. So I now make sure, like, at least for 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning, after like do my little teaser, like I have the little what's going on with me, and then I go into the interviews. So it's kind of the best of both worlds now.
Yeah, I love that. I might steal that idea. So Steve, what are your upcoming goals for this show? I know, you're coming up on, I think, 200 episodes, right?
Yes, I
So it
am
can
within the
get kind
next.
of kind of get into the routine. It can be monotonous sometimes. So what are your goals, moving forward with the show and your brand?
I am still trying to figure all of that out little by little. I know that I've recently kind of been leveling up a lot of my podcasting game as I've been doing it more full time when I switched from it from November. So between going to Podfest in Orlando and then I was at Podcasting Evolutions over in LA and working with like a podcasting coach, it's been really helpful kind of leveling up my podcast as well as the way that I can help other people with their podcasts. And so I'm excited to be able to put a lot of those tools into it over the next couple of months as I get
Great.
going and growing. I know that I definitely want to keep the guests on Thursdays for sharing their stories, but I'm also considering like reintroducing the idea of doing smaller episodes on Monday, maybe featuring like resources for our community. Cause I get a lot of times people that say like, I offer like inclusive help for queer people, but I don't have anyone on my staff that's like queer to kind of be the spokesperson for it to tell you, but it's like all these resources for queer sober people. So maybe being able to feature them on some Mondays and make sure that kind of you you know grow and evolve and see where it goes without changing too much too quick.
Yeah, I love that idea. Steve, where can people find you online or find the podcast or more about gAy?
Yes, gAy in your podcasting players. It helps if you do gAy and then also queer and sober because gAy is just horrible SEO. I learned after I fell in love with the
Oh,
name and wasn't going
shit.
to change it because it just
Yeah.
anything that also if you it's basically like searching a gay in your search bar doesn't really help.
Looking for a
The,
gay.
yeah, so queer sober helps with my show up, and then my website Sober Steve, so that kind of has everything I do between my podcasting and everything.
I love that. Steve Bennet-Martin, host of gAy. What a pleasure. So glad we finally crossed paths. Let's keep in touch. I feel like there's definitely room for collaboration here. I would love to perhaps, work on something together in the future.
Well, yeah, you'll have to come on my show next.
I would love to. I'm here for it.
Excellent. Sounds good.
Steve, thanks so much. Enjoy your day, my friend.
All right. Thank you. You too.
Thanks so much for listening today, friends, and downloading our episodes. Hopefully you heard something inspiring today and that resonates with you. For more information and to apply to be a guest on the show, head over to thesobrietydiaries.com or follow us on Instagram at Podcast Revolution Studios. I love chatting with you guys. Check out all of our video episodes at youtube.com/NateKelly. Make sure to subscribe to the show now so you never miss an upload. We're back with new episodes every Wednesday. Goodbye, everyone.